What if the biggest decision the Cleveland Browns have made this offseason isn't the one they've announced, but the one they haven't? While most of the attention has been locked on quarterback battles, rookie headlines, and the excitement surrounding Shedeur Sanders, another storyline has quietly been building in the background. It's a story that could completely reshape the Browns' offense before the NFL trade deadline even arrives. And at the center of it all is Jerry Jeudy. From the outside, everything looks relatively normal. Jeudy remains on the roster, he's taking reps, and the organization hasn't publicly suggested that he's going anywhere. But when you step back and look at the Browns' offseason as a whole, the roster decisions, the investments in younger talent, the coaching focus, and the growing conversation around the team's future, a much bigger picture starts to emerge. That's exactly why Browns fans have been debating one question more than almost any other. Is Jerry Jeudy truly part of Cleveland's long-term plans, or is he becoming one of the franchise's most valuable trade assets? The speculation didn't appear overnight. Over the past few weeks, multiple analysts covering the Browns have discussed the possibility that Jeudy could become a logical trade candidate if Cleveland decides to lean fully into its long-term rebuild. Those reports don't confirm that a move is coming, and no official decision has been announced, but they have sparked an important conversation about the direction Andrew Berry and the front office may be taking. In the NFL, front offices rarely reveal their plans months in advance. More often, fans have to piece together the clues by watching how a team builds its roster rather than listening to what it says publicly. And that's where things become especially interesting. Every offseason move tells a story. Draft picks reveal priorities, coaching decisions reveal confidence, position battles reveal who is earning trust behind closed doors. When those pieces begin fitting together, they sometimes point toward a future that hasn't officially arrived yet. Whether that's happening with Jerry Jeudy is exactly what Browns fans are trying to figure out. Then there's Shedeur Sanders, whose arrival has changed the conversation surrounding Cleveland almost overnight. Suddenly, the focus isn't just on winning games this season, it's about building an offense that can grow with a young quarterback who many believe has the talent to become the face of the franchise. If that's truly the organization's vision, then every roster decision, including what happens with veteran players like Jeudy, takes on a completely different meaning. But before anyone jumps to conclusions, it's important to separate facts from speculation. There is no official announcement saying Jerry Jeudy will be traded. There is no confirmation that the Browns have already made up their minds. What we do have are roster decisions, analyst opinions, coaching comments, and a growing number of questions that all seem to point in the same direction. Whether those clues actually lead to a trade is still unknown, but they're impossible to ignore. And once you examine everything together, one detail stands out above the rest. It isn't a rumor, it isn't a headline, it's a pattern that may explain exactly why this story has gained so much momentum and why the Browns' next move could surprise almost everyone. Because when you follow that trail from the front office to the practice field and from the practice field to the quarterback room, you begin to see a strategy that could define Cleveland's future for years to come. And that's where this story really begins. Jerry Jeudy's name didn't suddenly appear in trade conversations because of one bad practice or one viral headline. The discussion has been building for months, fueled by the way the Browns have approached their roster and by analysts trying to project what Cleveland could do if the season doesn't unfold as planned. That's an important distinction. As of today, there has been no official announcement from the Browns that Jeudy is on the trading block. But around the league, teams don't always announce their intentions long before the deadline. Instead, speculation grows from patterns, timing, and the value a player could have on the market.
One of the voices adding fuel to that conversation is Browns analyst Justin Carter, who suggested that if Cleveland decides to become sellers at the trade deadline, Jerry Jeudy could be one of the organization's most valuable trade assets. Notice the wording. It's not a report that a deal has already been agreed to. It's an opinion based on roster construction, contract value, and how contenders typically shop for proven receivers once the playoff race begins. That's a much different conversation than claiming the Browns have secretly decided to move on. So why does Jeudy keep coming up instead of other veterans? The answer starts with simple NFL economics. Wide receivers who are still in their prime and have proven they can produce against top defenses almost always generate interest around the deadline. Every season, playoff contenders suffer injuries. A receiver goes down, an offense loses explosiveness, and suddenly a team is willing to spend draft capital for immediate help. If Cleveland found itself outside the playoff picture while another franchise was making a championship push, Jeudy is exactly the type of player opposing general managers would at least call about. His career also adds another layer to the conversation. Ever since entering the league as a first-round pick, Jeudy has flashed the elite route-running ability that made him one of college football's most exciting prospects. At times, he's looked capable of taking over games. At other moments, injuries, inconsistent quarterback play, and changing offensive systems have prevented him from putting together the kind of sustained dominance many expected. Because of that, evaluators around the league still see untapped potential. Some organizations may believe a change in environment could unlock the version of Jeudy that scouts envisioned years ago. That's exactly why his value is so intriguing. To Cleveland, he could still be an important piece of the offense. To another team, he could represent a calculated gamble with a potentially massive payoff. When both possibilities exist at the same time, trade speculation naturally follows. It doesn't mean a move is inevitable, it simply means the market could exist if the Browns ever decide to listen. Another reason these rumors continue to gain attention is because of where the Browns appear to be as a franchise. If the Browns are truly building around a younger core and focusing on the future, every veteran player becomes part of a larger equation. Front offices constantly ask difficult questions. Who fits the long-term timeline? Who could bring back valuable draft assets? Which players help the next championship team rather than the current one? Those conversations happen inside every NFL building, whether fans hear about them or not. Of course, there's another side to this story that often gets overlooked. Trading away an experienced receiver isn't a simple decision, especially if you're trying to develop a young quarterback. Veterans provide stability. They understand coverages, recognize adjustments before the snap, and help younger players settle into an NFL offense. If Cleveland believes Shedeur Sanders or any young quarterback needs experienced targets to accelerate his development, keeping Jeudy could make just as much sense as trading him. That's why nothing is settled yet. Still, one question refuses to go away. If the Browns truly view Jerry Jeudy as a cornerstone of their future, why has the conversation shifted so heavily toward what he could bring back in a trade instead of what he could contribute over the next several seasons? That question has become impossible to ignore, and the answer may not lie in rumors at all. Because when you stop focusing on headlines and start looking at the Browns' off-season decisions as a whole, another picture begins to emerge. It isn't based on anonymous sources or social media speculation. It's based on the moves Cleveland has already made, and those moves may reveal far more about the franchise's future than any trade rumor ever could. If you really want to understand where the Browns are headed, don't start with the trade rumors. Start with the draft board. NFL front offices rarely explain their long-term plans in press conferences, but they reveal them every April. Every draft pick is an investment, and every investment says something about what a team believes its future should look like.
That's why so many people have connected Cleveland's offseason moves to the growing conversation around Jerry Jeudy. Whether you agree with the speculation or not, one thing is undeniable. The Browns have made it clear they want to get younger, faster, and more explosive on offense. Teams don't spend premium resources on offensive playmakers simply to fill out the depth chart. They do it because they're planning for what the roster will look like not just this season, but 2 or 3 years down the road. This is where Andrew Berry's reputation becomes important. Throughout his time as general manager, Berry has built a reputation for making calculated decisions instead of emotional ones. He has never been afraid to think beyond the current season if he believes it will put the organization in a stronger position later. Sometimes those decisions are popular, sometimes they're criticized, but they've consistently reflected a front office that values long-term roster construction over short-term headlines. That's exactly why fans have started looking beyond the names on the roster and focusing on the overall direction of the franchise. Every new addition raises another question. Is Cleveland simply creating more competition, or is the organization quietly preparing for a changing of the guard? Those are two very different strategies, yet from the outside they can look almost identical, at least until the regular season begins. There's another reason the draft matters so much in this discussion. Rookie contracts have become one of the NFL's biggest competitive advantages. Young players offer teams financial flexibility while allowing them to build around expensive positions like quarterback, edge rusher, and offensive tackle. If a rookie develops quickly, a front office suddenly gains options. It can keep veteran players together, or it can move one of them to acquire additional draft capital. That's why every successful franchise constantly thinks several moves ahead instead of focusing on only the next game. Now, that doesn't automatically mean Jerry Jeudy is being replaced. Competition is part of every NFL roster, and talented teams welcome it. Veterans are expected to earn their roles every season, regardless of past production or draft status. It's entirely possible that Cleveland simply wants to surround its offense with as much talent as possible. But it's equally understandable why some analysts believe these moves could eventually create flexibility if the right trade opportunity appears. Another detail that's easy to overlook is timing. The Browns didn't wait until the middle of the season to begin reshaping the offense. They started laying the foundation months earlier. That's how successful organizations operate. By the time a trade happens or doesn't happen, the groundwork has usually been in place for a long time. Fans often see the final move, but they miss the months of planning that made it possible. And then there's the biggest factor of all, the quarterback. Every offensive decision eventually circles back to who's taking the snaps. Receivers, running backs, tight ends, and even offensive linemen are chosen based on how they fit the quarterback's strengths. If Cleveland truly believes its future revolves around a young signal caller, then every roster decision suddenly begins to make more sense through that lens. That's why the conversation doesn't stop with Jerry Jeudy. In many ways, it leads directly to Shedeur Sanders. Because if the Browns are building an entirely new offensive identity around their young quarterback, then every roster decision, including who stays and who eventually leaves, starts to fit into a much larger blueprint. And that's where this story takes an even more fascinating turn. Every rebuilding team reaches a moment when the conversation stops being about the veterans and starts revolving around the quarterback. For the Cleveland Browns, many fans believe that moment arrived the instant Shedeur Sanders walked through the door. Whether he becomes the franchise's long-term answer remains to be seen, but one thing is already becoming clear. His development is beginning to shape nearly every discussion surrounding this team's future. That's why the Jerry Jeudy conversation can't be viewed in isolation. It's no longer just about one receiver or one possible trade. It's about the direction of the entire organization. If the Browns believe they finally have a young quarterback capable of leading the franchise for years to come, then every roster decision suddenly has a different purpose. The goal shifts from squeezing out one more competitive season to building the strongest possible foundation around that quarterback.
Reports from the offseason only added to that excitement. Browns quarterbacks coach Mike Bickajan spoke about Sanders' approach in the film room, explaining that the rookie was recognizing defensive looks and anticipating coverages at a level that stood out during meetings. Those observations don't guarantee NFL success, but they help explain why the coaching staff has been encouraged by Sanders' preparation long before meaningful games have even begun. For a rookie quarterback, processing defenses quickly is often just as important as arm strength or athletic ability. That's one of the reasons so many people inside and outside the organization are paying close attention to his progress. Physical talent gets quarterbacks drafted. Mental processing is what keeps them on the field. If Sanders continues proving he can diagnose defenses, make quick decisions, and avoid costly mistakes, Cleveland's confidence in building around him will only continue to grow. But developing a young quarterback isn't just about coaching, it's about surrounding him with the right environment. Front offices constantly ask difficult questions. which receivers fit his style, which veterans help accelerate his learning, which young players can grow alongside him over the next several seasons. Those questions influence personnel decisions just as much as statistics or highlight plays. That's why every practice rep has suddenly taken on greater significance. Whenever Sanders throws with the first-team offense, completes a difficult read, or earns praise from coaches, fans immediately begin connecting those moments to the Browns' long-term plans. Even routine off-season practices become part of a much bigger story because everyone is trying to identify which players will become part of his future supporting cast. Interestingly, Jerry Jeudy still occupies an important place in that discussion. Despite the trade speculation, an experienced receiver can be invaluable for a developing quarterback. Veterans understand timing, recognize defensive adjustments before the snap, and know how to create separation when plays break down. Those qualities can make life much easier for a rookie learning the speed of the NFL. If Sanders develops quickly, Jeudy could become one of his most reliable targets rather than a player on the move. On the other hand, if Cleveland believes its younger receivers are progressing faster than expected, while Sanders continues earning the coaching staff's trust, the organization could eventually decide that its long-term timeline points in a different direction. That's exactly why analysts continue debating Jeudy's future. It's not necessarily about his talent, it's about how he fits into the broader vision the Browns are trying to build. And that vision appears to center on patience. Successful franchises rarely make blockbuster decisions overnight. They evaluate every practice, every preseason snap, every meeting, and every regular season performance before determining which pieces belong in the next chapter. Sanders' development could ultimately become the deciding factor in several roster decisions, not because he's asking for changes, but because every organization naturally builds around the quarterback it believes can lead the future. That brings us to the biggest question surrounding Jerry Jeudy himself. For years, flashes of elite ability have never been enough to silence the doubts. Now, with another organization evaluating his role, while a new quarterback begins changing the direction of the franchise, Jeudy may be approaching the most important stretch of his NFL career. And that's where his story becomes even more compelling. Jerry Jeudy's NFL journey has never lacked talent. From the moment he entered the league as a first-round pick out of Alabama, expectations were enormous. Scouts praised his route running as some of the best they'd seen from a college receiver in years. His ability to create separation looked effortless, and many believed he was destined to become one of the NFL's elite pass catchers. But sometimes talent alone isn't enough, and Jeudy's career has become a perfect example of how circumstances can shape a player's legacy just as much as ability. His time with the Denver Broncos was filled with flashes of brilliance, but consistency proved difficult to find. Coaching changes, quarterback instability, injuries, and an offense that never seemed to find its identity created an environment where Jeudy was constantly trying to adapt instead of simply playing his game. One week he'd look like the explosive receiver everyone expected him to become. The next, he disappeared from the offense entirely. Those ups and downs created a narrative that followed him throughout his career, whether it was completely fair or not.
Eventually, Denver decided it was time to move in a different direction, sending Jeudy to Cleveland in hopes that a fresh start could unlock the potential that made him such a highly regarded prospect. For Jeudy, it represented more than just changing teams. It was an opportunity to reset the conversation surrounding his career. New coaches, a new locker room, and a different offensive system offered the chance to prove that his best football was still ahead of him. To his credit, Jeudy showed exactly why so many teams continued believing in his talent. When healthy and given opportunities, he demonstrated the speed, route-running precision, and playmaking ability that made him one of the league's most intriguing receivers. There were stretches where he looked every bit like the player scouts envisioned coming out of college. Those performances reminded everyone that the physical tools had never disappeared. But the NFL is a results-driven league, and front offices rarely make decisions based solely on potential. Every season brings new draft picks, new competition, and new financial considerations. Players are evaluated not only on what they've accomplished, but also on where they fit into the organization's future plans. That's why even productive veterans can suddenly find themselves at the center of trade speculation. It's often less about what they've done wrong and more about the direction a franchise is trying to take. For Jeudy, that's what makes this stage of his career so fascinating. He's no longer the young prospect waiting for his first opportunity. He's an experienced veteran who has already experienced one major career reset. If Cleveland ultimately decides to keep him, this could become the season that finally silences years of criticism and establishes him as one of the offense's most dependable playmakers. But if the Browns choose another path, he'll once again be asked to prove himself in a completely new environment. That's why opinions about Jeudy remain so divided. Some fans believe he has never been placed in the ideal situation to fully showcase his abilities. Others argue that elite receivers eventually rise above difficult circumstances, regardless of who's throwing them the football. The truth probably falls somewhere in the middle. Football is the ultimate team sport, and a receiver's success depends on coaching, quarterback play, offensive design, and opportunity just as much as individual talent. Another factor that's easy to overlook is the pressure that comes with being labeled a first-round pick. Expectations never disappear. Every dropped pass, every quiet game, and every season that falls short of projections is magnified because of where a player was selected. Fair or unfair, Jeudy has carried those expectations since the day he entered the league, and they're still following him today. Now, he finds himself standing at another pivotal moment. The Browns are entering a new era. Young players are pushing for larger roles, the offense is evolving, and the organization is focused on building for the present and the future. Whether Jerry Jeudy becomes an important part of that vision or eventually finds himself wearing another uniform is still uncertain. What is uncertain is that the next few months could shape the rest of his NFL career. And that's exactly why training camp suddenly becomes more important than ever. Rumors and projections can dominate headlines throughout the offseason, but once the pads come on, every conversation changes. Performance replaces speculation, and that's where the biggest answers may finally begin to emerge. Every offseason is filled with opinions. Analysts debate depth charts, fans argue over projected starters, and social media turns every practice clip into a major headline. But none of that truly matters until training camp begins. That's when speculation gives way to competition, and every player is forced to prove exactly where they belong. For Jerry Jeudy, this year's camp may be the most important of his entire career. The Browns can talk about competition all they want, but once the pads come on, the coaching staff starts collecting the only evidence that really counts. Every route is graded, every rep is evaluated, every missed assignment is remembered. The margin between earning a featured role and slipping down the depth chart is often much smaller than fans realize. Sometimes it's not one spectacular catch that changes a player's future. It's weeks of consistency that convince coaches they can trust him when the regular season arrives. That's why all eyes will be on the receiver room from the very first day. Veterans are fighting to protect their roles, while younger players are trying to prove they deserve larger opportunities. The Browns have invested heavily in building more competition, and that creates pressure on everyone, not just rookies. No player, regardless of experience, can assume his spot is guaranteed. At the same time, one storyline is expected to dominate nearly every practice report: Shedeur Sanders. Every throw he makes, every decision he processes, and every connection he develops with his receivers will be analyzed by reporters and fans alike. That's simply the reality of being a young quarterback with enormous expectations. And naturally, people will begin paying close attention to which receivers earn his trust the fastest.
That chemistry matters more than many fans realize. Quarterbacks don't just throw to the most talented receiver, they throw to the player they trust. Trust is built through repetition. It comes from knowing exactly where a receiver will be before he makes his break. It comes from recognizing body language, timing, and subtle adjustments against different coverages. Those relationships aren't built overnight, but training camp is where they usually begin. If Jeudy consistently becomes Sanders' favorite target during team drills, the entire trade conversation could start cooling down. Suddenly, instead of asking whether Cleveland should move him before the deadline, fans would be asking whether he's becoming the perfect veteran weapon for a developing quarterback. One strong training camp can completely change an off-season narrative, especially when expectations are already divided. On the other hand, if younger receivers continue generating buzz while Jeudy struggles to separate himself, the speculation will only grow louder. That still wouldn't mean a trade is inevitable. Training camp alone doesn't determine roster moves months later, but perception matters in the NFL, and early impressions often shape the conversations that continue throughout the regular season. A player doesn't have to lose his job for questions about his future to become even louder. There's another layer that often goes unnoticed. Coaches aren't simply evaluating catches and touchdowns, they're studying effort when the ball isn't coming your way. They're watching blocking assignments, communication before the snap, reaction after mistakes, inconsistency from one practice to the next. Those details rarely appear in highlight videos, but they heavily influence who earns playing time once the games begin. For Shedeur Sanders, camp represents an opportunity to show that the encouraging reports from off-season meetings translate onto the practice field. For Jerry Jeudy, it's a chance to remind everyone why he was once viewed as one of football's brightest young receivers. And for the Browns front office, it's another opportunity to gather information before making any significant decisions later in the season. That combination is exactly what makes this camp so fascinating. It's not just about naming starters or preparing for Week 1, it's about discovering which players fit the franchise's long-term vision and which ones may eventually become difficult business decisions. Every practice brings another clue, another evaluation, and another piece of a much larger puzzle. By the time preseason games arrive, the picture should begin coming into focus. Some off-season narratives will disappear completely, others will become even stronger. And if the Browns' young core continues developing the way many inside the organization hope, one question will become impossible to avoid. Does Cleveland double down on its youth movement, or does it keep leaning on experienced veterans like Jerry Jeudy? The answer to that question won't just affect one player, it could shape the Browns' entire approach to the trade deadline and reveal whether this team is focused on making a playoff push now or building something much bigger for the future. Now comes the question that's dividing Browns fans more than any other. Let's say the speculation eventually becomes reality. Let's say Cleveland actually receives a serious offer for Jerry Jeudy before the trade deadline. Who would really come out ahead? The Browns, or the team willing to take a chance on one of the league's most intriguing receivers? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. If Cleveland were able to turn a veteran receiver into valuable draft capital while continuing to develop its younger core, many would view that as smart roster management. That's how successful front offices often operate. They identify the right moment to maximize a player's value, collect future assets, and continue building toward a bigger goal. It's a strategy we've seen across the NFL countless times, especially with teams thinking beyond a single season. But football is rarely that simple. Jerry Jeudy isn't a declining player nearing the end of his career. He's still in his athletic prime, and when he's been healthy and involved in the offense, he's shown exactly why he was once considered one of college football's elite prospects. Route running was never his issue, creating separation was never his issue. The biggest question throughout his career has been whether everything around him, coaching stability, quarterback play, offensive consistency, and opportunity, would ever align at the same time. That's why another team could view him very differently than Cleveland does. Imagine a contender entering October with legitimate Super Bowl aspirations. Maybe one of its starting receivers suffers an injury. Maybe the offense lacks a dependable separator on third down. Suddenly, adding a player like Jeudy becomes far more appealing than waiting until the offseason. A playoff team isn't necessarily looking for a long-term rebuild piece. It's looking for someone who can help win meaningful games immediately. In that situation, Jeudy's experience, athleticism, and ability to stretch defenses become valuable assets. History tells us this happens almost every season.
As the trade deadline approaches, contenders become aggressive. Teams that believe they're only 1 or 2 players away from a championship often become willing to part with draft picks if they think a veteran can elevate the offense. That's one reason analysts continue mentioning Jeudy whenever trade discussions surface. It's not because a deal is guaranteed, it's because receivers with his resume often attract interest when playoff races begin taking shape. From Cleveland's perspective, however, the calculation could look completely different. If the Browns believe their younger receivers are developing faster than expected, and if Shedeur Sanders continues progressing into the quarterback they envision for the future, acquiring additional draft capital could accelerate that timeline even further. Extra selections create flexibility. They allow teams to address multiple positions, move around the draft board, or even package assets for bigger moves down the road. Front offices value options almost as much as they value talent. But there's also a compelling argument for doing absolutely nothing. Developing a rookie quarterback is difficult enough without constantly changing the supporting cast around him. Veteran receivers often become a young quarterback's safety net. They understand defensive disguises, recognize adjustments before the snap, and know how to find soft spots in coverage when plays begin to break down. Those are qualities that don't always show up in the box score, but can dramatically speed up a quarterback's development. If Cleveland believes Jeudy provides that stability, keeping him may ultimately outweigh any draft compensation another team is willing to offer. That's why the situation isn't nearly as one-sided as it appears. The trade speculation has created the impression that only one outcome makes sense, but NFL front offices rarely think that way. Every decision comes with risk. Trade Jeudy, and the Browns could lose one of their most experienced offensive weapons just as a young quarterback is finding his footing. Keep Jeudy, and they may pass on an opportunity to gain valuable assets that could strengthen the roster for years to come. Neither path guarantees success. There's another factor fans shouldn't ignore either. Performance changes everything. If Jeudy opens the season playing some of the best football of his career, Cleveland's priorities could shift overnight. A productive veteran receiver catching passes from an improving quarterback suddenly becomes far more valuable than a future draft pick. On the other hand, if younger receivers establish themselves while the offense continues evolving without relying heavily on Jeudy, the front office may view the deadline very differently. That's why projecting what happens in July is much easier than predicting what happens after 8 or 9 regular season games. Ultimately, this isn't just about one potential transaction, it's about the identity of the franchise. Is Cleveland focused on maximizing every opportunity to compete right now, or is the organization willing to sacrifice proven talent in order to strengthen the foundation for the next several seasons? The answer may not become clear until the deadline arrives. And that's what makes the final chapter of this story so fascinating, because whether Jerry Jeudy remains in Cleveland or eventually wears another uniform, the biggest storyline isn't really about one receiver at all. It's about the long-term blueprint Andrew Berry and the Browns are trying to build, and whether every move they've made over the past several months seems to point toward one question: what does Cleveland want to look like 2 or 3 years from now?
That's how successful NFL organizations think. They don't build their rosters one Sunday at a time. They build them years in advance. Every draft pick, every contract, every free agent signing, and every difficult roster decision is connected to a larger blueprint. Fans often judge a move in isolation, but front offices rarely do. They evaluate how one decision affects the next 5 decisions and how today's sacrifice could become tomorrow's advantage. Andrew Berry has consistently shown that he values flexibility almost as much as talent. Whether fans agree with every move or not, his approach has generally been centered around maintaining options. Draft capital creates options. Salary cap flexibility creates options. Young players on rookie contracts create options. Those are the resources that allow teams to adjust when opportunities arise, whether that's making a blockbuster trade, extending cornerstone players, or filling unexpected holes across the roster. That's why the Cleveland youth movement has attracted so much attention. It's not just about finding talented players, it's about building a core that can grow together. If a young quarterback develops into the face of the franchise, the ideal scenario is surrounding him with receivers, linemen, and playmakers who are all progressing on a similar timeline. That continuity gives offenses the chance to develop chemistry over multiple seasons instead of constantly starting over. And that's where Shedeur Sanders becomes such an important piece of the puzzle. If the Browns truly believe Sanders has franchise quarterback potential, every roster decision naturally begins revolving around maximizing his development. The offensive system, the coaching priorities, the personnel decisions, and even future draft strategies start serving one objective: creating the best possible environment for a young quarterback to succeed. That's how organizations like Kansas City, Buffalo, Cincinnati, and Houston accelerated their rebuilds after finding quarterbacks they believed in. The quarterback becomes the foundation, and everything else is built around him. Of course, Cleveland still has to prove it can follow that path. Optimism during the offseason doesn't automatically translate into victories once the regular season begins. Young quarterbacks face steep learning curves, rookies experience setbacks, offensive systems evolve. What looks like a perfect long-term plan in July can change dramatically by November. That's why the Browns continue evaluating every position instead of locking themselves into one vision too early. This is also why Jerry Jeudy's future remains so difficult to predict. If he becomes one of Sanders' most trusted weapons, his importance to the offense could increase significantly. Veteran receivers often play a critical role in helping young quarterbacks navigate their first seasons. Timing, communication, and experience can't always be replaced by raw athleticism. In that scenario, keeping Jeudy would make complete sense because he would become part of the foundation Cleveland is trying to build. But if younger receivers continue developing rapidly, and the Browns believe they can maintain offensive production while gaining additional draft assets through a potential trade, the front office may eventually decide that moving a veteran better serves the organization's long-term objectives. Again, that's only one possible outcome, not a certainty. The final decision will depend on how the season unfolds, how the offense performs, and what opportunities actually become available before the trade deadline. What's fascinating is that both paths could align with the same overall philosophy. Keeping Jeudy wouldn't necessarily mean abandoning the rebuild. Trading him wouldn't automatically signal surrendering the season. Either decision could be justified if it fits the Browns' long-term vision. That's why trying to judge the organization based on a single move often misses the bigger story. The real objective isn't simply winning one transaction, it's assembling a roster capable of sustained success over several years. And that's the point many fans overlook when they focus only on rumors or headlines. The Browns appear to be thinking beyond this season. Whether that ultimately leads to a playoff push, another year of development, or significant roster changes remains to be seen, but every indication suggests the organization is trying to build something that lasts rather than chasing quick fixes. That's a strategy that demands patience, difficult decisions, and sometimes unpopular moves. Which brings us back to the question that started this entire discussion. Has Cleveland already decided Jerry Jeudy's future? The honest answer is that no one outside the organization knows for certain. The rumors, the analyst opinions, and the roster construction all provide clues, but they don't provide definitive answers. What they do reveal is that the Browns are entering one of the most important turning points of Andrew Berry's tenure. The choices made over the coming months won't just determine Jerry Jeudy's future, they could shape the future of the entire franchise. And by the time the trade deadline arrives, we'll finally know whether this offseason speculation was simply another NFL storyline or the first chapter of Cleveland's next era.